At first, Olivia couldn't put her finger on it. The way Ethan moved around the house felt different, detached, like a stranger wearing her husband's skin. Conversations became one-sided, his responses clipped and dismissive. He used to greet her with a kiss when he got home. But now he barely looked at her. His gaze always distant, as if he were preoccupied with something darker. Something she wasn't meant to understand. Late at night, he sat on the edge of their bed, staring at nothing, lost in thought. The silence between them thickened, and Olivia felt it pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Then came the excuses. He started staying out late, brushing off her questions with vague responses. "Work's been busy," he'd say, his voice devoid of warmth. But Olivia knew better. It wasn't just stress, it was something else. Something lurking beneath the surface. A secret. The tension between them grew unbearable. An invisible force pulling them further apart. The man she had once trusted with her heart was slipping away. And for the first time in their marriage, Olivia felt a cold, creeping fear that she was about to lose something much more than just love. The night Ethan finally spoke his mind, Olivia felt the air shift, heavy, suffocating, laced with something unspoken. He sat across from her at the dinner table, his fork idly pushing food around his plate. His jaw clenched. When he finally looked up, there was a strange gleam in his eyes, one that sent a ripple of unease down her spine. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice measured but firm. "About us. About spicing things up." Olivia forced a laugh, hoping this was one of his rare, offbeat jokes. "What, like a vacation?" she teased, trying to cut through the tension. But Ethan didn't smile. "No," he said flatly, his fingers tapping against the wood. "Something more, something different." Then, without hesitation, he told her. The words spilled from his lips so effortlessly, as if he'd rehearsed them 100 times. He had arranged for them to meet another man, a stranger, someone who would join them. Someone who would bring excitement into their marriage. Olivia's stomach turned. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing in on her. She searched his face for a hint of regret, some sign that he understood the horror of what he was suggesting. But all she saw was expectation. The days after Ethan's proposal were a blur of tension and unspoken words. Olivia moved through the house like a ghost, her mind churning with disbelief. She wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, that she'd misheard, that maybe Ethan would come to his senses. But every time she looked at him, she saw it, the certainty in his gaze, the quiet confidence of a man who had already decided. She tried to talk to him again, to reason with him. "Ethan, this isn't us," she pleaded one evening as he leaned against the kitchen counter, swirling a glass of bourbon like he had all the time in the world. "We can fix whatever's broken, but not like this." His smirk was sharp, his eyes cold. "You always say you want me to be honest, Olivia. Well, this is me being honest. I need this. We need this." She recoiled as if he'd struck her. He didn't see it, not the panic rising in her chest, the betrayal that gnawed at her insides. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Ethan slept soundly beside her. The man she married was slipping away, and in his place was someone she didn't recognize. The weekend loomed over Olivia like an approaching storm, thick with dread and inevitability. Ethan moved through the house as if nothing had changed, his demeanor unnervingly casual. But Olivia felt it, the shift in power, the slow tightening of control. Every time she tried to speak, to argue, he would simply brush a hand down her arm, tilt his head, and say, "Just trust me." But she couldn't. By Friday evening, the weight of her silence was suffocating. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to pack a bag and run. But where? To Sophie's? She could already hear her best friend's voice, demanding explanations Olivia wasn't ready to give. And deep down, the thought of leaving Ethan, of walking away from the life they'd built, was just as terrifying as staying. She lingered by the front door that night, gripping the handle so hard her knuckles turned white. But then she heard him in the kitchen, humming a song she used to love, as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't just shattered everything between them. And in that moment, she knew, This wasn't just about desire. This was about control, and she was running out of time. The doorbell rang, sharp and final, like the toll of a bell marking the end of something Olivia couldn't name. Her stomach clenched as she stood frozen in the hallway, watching Ethan move toward the door with an easy stride, as if he were simply welcoming old friends. But Olivia knew better. This wasn't a dinner party. It was a transaction, a test, a breaking point. When the door swung open, two men stepped inside, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other lean with piercing blue eyes that flickered toward her with unreadable intent. Ethan greeted them with casual warmth, shaking hands, offering drinks, as though nothing about this was unusual. Olivia could feel their presence fill the space, thickening the air around her, making her pulse race. She wanted to run, to scream, to shatter the moment before it solidified into something irreversible. But Ethan turned to her then, his hand finding her lower back, fingers pressing just enough to remind her that she was his to command. "It's time, Olivia," he murmured, his voice smooth as glass but sharp underneath. She looked at him, pleading with her eyes, but his were cold, and she realized then, he had already made his choice. Now she had to make hers. Olivia sat stiffly on the couch, her fingers curled tightly around the hem of her dress, knuckles white from the pressure. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with expectation and unspoken words. Ethan lounged beside her, his posture relaxed, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Max and his companion, Daniel, sat across from them, their gazes flickering between Olivia and Ethan, waiting. She wanted to believe this was still negotiable, that Ethan would suddenly realize the insanity of what he was asking. But then he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't make this difficult, Olivia," he whispered, his voice calm, but edged with something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. Her stomach twisted, nausea rising. She had given Ethan everything, her trust, her love, the best years of her life. And now, he was willing to throw it all away for some twisted fantasy. Max cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "We don't have to do this if she's not comfortable," he said, his tone unreadable. Olivia's head snapped up, searching his face for sincerity. For the first time, she realized that the only person forcing this was Ethan. The weight of Ethan's ultimatum pressed down on Olivia's chest like a stone. The room was silent, waiting for her response, but her voice had abandoned her. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out every other sound. Across from her, Max shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. His companion, Daniel, simply observed, unreadable, but Ethan was unwavering. "If you leave, we're done," he said, his tone eerily calm, as if you were discussing dinner plans instead of dismantling their marriage. Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat, her nails digging into her palms. This wasn't a request, it was a demand, a final push to break her completely. For years, she had bent to his will, made excuses for him, convinced herself that love meant sacrifice. But this wasn't love. She stood slowly, her legs shaking beneath her. "Then we're done." Ethan's jaw clenched. For a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, fear, anger, but he didn't stop her. He just watched as she walked toward the door, her heart hammering. Max exhaled sharply. "Olivia, are you sure?" She hesitated, her fingers on the doorknob. Then, without turning back, she whispered, "I've never been more sure." The night air hit Olivia like a slap, cold, sharp, and awakening. The moment she stepped outside, she felt the weight of Ethan's presence lift off her shoulders. But the emptiness it left behind was unsettling. She had no plan, no destination, only the unbearable certainty that she couldn't go back. The street was eerily quiet, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows as she walked, her heart pounding with the fear of the unknown. Her feet carried her forward without thought, and before she knew it, she was standing in front of Sophie's house. The familiar porch light flickered, and for the first time all evening, she let herself breathe. She knocked softly, hesitant, but within seconds, the door swung open. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of her. taking in the tear-streaked face, the trembling hands. She didn't ask, she didn't need to. Without a word, Sophie pulled Olivia into a tight embrace. The warmth of her friend's arms was Olivia's undoing. A sob tore from her throat, and she clung to Sophie, the reality of what she had just done crashing over her. She had walked away, she had chosen herself, and for the first time in years, she felt free. The days that followed felt like a blur, like Olivia was floating through a world that no longer felt familiar. She stayed at Sophie's, barely speaking, barely eating, trying to make sense of the mess her life had become. The echoes of Ethan's words still haunted her, the ultimatum that had shattered everything. She replayed the moment over and over, wondering if she could have done something different. But deep down, she knew the truth. This ending was inevitable. Sophie stayed by her side, offering quiet support, never pressing for details Olivia wasn't ready to share. "You did the right thing," she said one night as they sat on the couch, the room filled with the soft hum of late-night television. Olivia wanted to believe that. She wanted to trust that leaving was the right choice, that she wasn't throwing away a decade of her life for nothing. Then Ethan's messages started. Some were angry, full of blame. Others were apologetic, desperate, a roller coaster of emotions that left Olivia staring at her phone, unsure of how to feel. But for the first time, she didn't answer. She let the silence speak for her. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to rebuild herself. Months passed, and Olivia finally started to feel like herself again. The weight that had once pressed against her chest had eased, the wounds Ethan left behind beginning to fade into scars, reminders of the past but no longer sources of pain. She had moved into a small apartment of her own, a space untouched by the ghosts of her marriage. It was quiet, peaceful, hers. For the first time in years, she felt free. One afternoon, as she sipped coffee by the window, she scrolled past an unread message from Ethan. She hesitated, then pressed delete without reading it. He no longer had a place in her world, and that decision gave her a sense of closure she never thought she'd find. Instead, she focused on moving forward. She started going out more, reconnecting with people she had lost touch with, rediscovering pieces of herself she had buried beneath the weight of a toxic love. Sophie remained her anchor, reminding her that she had survived the worst. And maybe, just maybe, Olivia was finally ready for something new. Not love, not yet, but a life that was hers to shape, without anyone else defining her choices. Olivia's story is a reminder that love should never come at the cost of self-respect. In today's world, many people find themselves in relationships where control is mistaken for devotion, and manipulation is disguised as love. If you ever feel like you're losing yourself to someone else's desires, take a step back and ask, is this truly love? Or is it control? No one has the right to pressure you into situations that violate your values or comfort. Prioritize your well-being, set firm boundaries, and surround yourself with those who uplift you. Walking away isn't weakness, it's the ultimate act of self-love.